Childhood Ireland's podcast, which features interviews and discussions on all issues relating to high quality in the early years and school age care sector. In our episodes, we've a range of speakers who are leaders in the areas that matter to Early Childhood Ireland members. This podcast series is proudly supported by Aricus Insurance, which offers a comprehensive range of cover at discounted premiums for both business and personal insurance products. So visit www.aricus.ie for more information. Children's rights is a key aspect of the work that all of us do. It underpins all our interactions, our pedagogy and our practice. In the first episode of this series, Professor Noreen Hayes gave an overview of children's rights to education, and in the bonus episode for the International Day of Play, we spoke more specifically about the fundamental right to play. In the last episode, Dr. Sheila Long from SETU told us about global citizen education as a vital facet of our work in the area of children's rights. And in this episode, we're going to focus on inclusion and special rights. I'm Maura Corbett and I work with Early Childhood Ireland, and today I'm really delighted to be joined by Professor Emer Ring. Emer is the Dean of Education at Mary Immaculate College. She's worked as a Senior Inspector with the Department of Education. She's been a mainstream primary class teacher, and she worked as a learning support resource teacher before she joined Mary Immaculate College as head of the Department of Reflective Pedagogy and Early Childhood Studies back in 2011. Emer lectures across early childhood and teacher education programs, and she supervises research from undergraduate to doctorate levels. She's been the principal investigator on a range of national research projects covering areas such as early childhood, primary and post-primary education, inclusion, which she's particularly passionate about, child and student voice, pedagogy and autism. She's published widely in the area of inclusion, and of course, she and I were on the team that worked on the Universal Design Guidelines for Early Learning and Care Settings back in 2019. But since then, she's been intensively involved and continues to be in the LINC programme. She has described it as her baby. And she recently completed a project with the National Council for Special Education relating to 100 years of special education in Ireland, 1922 to 2022. And this project did include work relating to early years education. Emer, that's a very, very short summary of all the work that you've been involved in, and you're really welcome, and it's lovely to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you very much, Maura, and thanks so much for the invitation to join you. I'm really looking forward to having a chat really here it's this afternoon at this point, and just sharing my experience of working with so many inspirational people over a very long period of time around that area of inclusion.
So I suppose we'll get straight into it, Emer. When we talk about inclusion, what elements do you believe we need to think about when we're trying to develop that kind of shared understanding of what inclusion means for early childhood, early years educators? What are the things that we need to be thinking about?
Okay, I suppose the first thing I always think about, Maura, is language, because I was at, actually, do you know when it was? It was Kathleen Lynch was the minister, and it was the launch of the interdepartmental group, which really was the precursor of the access and inclusion model. And what she said has stayed with me since. And she said, language changes attitudes, and attitudes change the world. And those of your listeners who I know will have taken part in the LINC program, because we've over 5,000 early childhood teachers have completed that program, will know about how much we focus on language, and really throughout our history, that language of deficit that has been employed to refer to children who have been perceived as not being capable of accessing the broader early childhood system or the broader education system, and who learn very differently. And I suppose what we do know is that language is very much linked to the thinking at the time in society. And in my journey over 100 years, which I've just completed for the National Council for Special Education.
Just to be clear now, your journey didn't last 100 years. You did the research on it.
100 years. It does feel like 100 years, but what really struck me as I was kind of, going through the various documents I went through and the many conversations I had with people was that inappropriate confluence of language with mental illness, intellectual disability, and really what was perceived as non-conforming behavior. So really what this was a patent lack of understanding about how all children should be enabled to achieve their potential in the education system, and that we should celebrate difference and we should be attuned to difference, and we should really ensure that difference is the norm and that we are in a position, if you like, to ensure that everyone is enabled to achieve their potential. Now, Margaret Joyce, whom I really would like to talk about in this context, we all had the privilege to know Margaret. She worked on the LINC program with us for many years, and unfortunately, she is no longer with us. And as you know, the LINC program is delivered by that consortium led by Mary Immaculate College, but working with yourselves in Early Childhood Ireland and Maynooth University, the Freble Department of Primary and Early Childhood Education. So Margaret sadly passed away in 2022. But before she left us, she wrote a blog reminding us of the power of language and our responsibility, because we actually have a responsibility to use language always with respect and with deference. And the blog, I am going to read a little bit of it. It's published here in our recent evaluation of the LINC program. So you'll find this, if your listeners are interested in having a look at this report, it's actually the end of phase 1 of the LINC program, the final evaluation, and we're all very proud of it. And I'm going to talk about it some more when we talk about children's voice, but I'd just like to have Margaret's voice in this, and she reminds us about language, and she says, remember, language is a very powerful tool, both in the spoken and written word. It offers the child and family feelings of respect, dignity, compassion, and sensitivity. It is important to familiarize ourselves with the correct terminology and model this at all times. It is also important that language is not static, so we need to keep ourselves up to date with the language. And remember, a child or a person should never be defined by a label, and we should always focus on strengths and abilities rather than any additional needs a child may have. So I think, for me anyway, that kind of captures that essence and that importance, really, Maura, of language and the language we use. And I suppose, moving on kind of from the language, and very much linked to that language, is the importance of the lens through which we view difference. And look, we're all familiar with these words like disorder, disability, and the LINC program, and in my work also, I try to harness the word difference, because I think if we use the word difference, we're all different, we all learn very differently, and that challenges all of us actually as early childhood teachers and as educators to look at each child and to see that unique abilities and strengths that every child has. So how we then define equality at any particular time depends on the perspective that we adopt. And we know, and we learned this on our Bachelor of Arts in Early Childhood Care and Education program here when I was lecturing on the undergraduate program. We used to talk about Roman civilization, and that the birth of a child who was perceived as different was perceived as a warning from the gods, actually, signaling divine satisfaction. And we might think here in Ireland that, oh, sure, look, that happened in Rome and that's over there, but we were different. But we weren't, because many of your listeners would also remember the Dina Ledia, that those people in our environment and in our neighborhood who were perceived again to be different. And of course, folklore coincided with and coexisted with Christianity. And we all know that poem by W.B. Yeats, The Stolen Child, Come Away, O Human Child. So this was all kind of linked up with our understanding and difference. But we know, of course, that in the 1800s, we had psychiatry, and then we have psychology coming, and then we have education coming, and we begin really to see things very differently. However, the impact then of the medical model on our understanding, and we can still see this today, and I think we have to be very, very careful of the medical model, because when you think about a medical model, we think, oh, we see the difference within the child, and it's really the child's responsibility and not our responsibility. So, alleluia, along comes Yuri Bronfenbrenner. And he has to be one of my favorite theorists, because Bronfenbrenner, of course, tells us that it's about the child, of course, but it's about every other piece in the child's life, the child's family, the society, and everything. The whole system really has to be looked at. And so I think that has led us really to a situation, Maura, where we have shifted the lens from that lens of that medical model to more of a social model, and away from the mythology to a rights-based approach that you talked about at the start of this podcast.
And it's really interesting that you take us through that, because as you're talking there, it reminds me of a podcast that I listened to very recently with Dr. Sinead O'Kane. People might be familiar with her. She has only 5% vision, but she's an incredible endurance runner. And she's been visually impaired since birth, and everything that she has achieved in her life is incredible. But in her podcast with Laura Dowling a couple of weeks ago, she took exactly that same, from the medical model, implying that, a cure was needed kind of thing, to that kind of social model, and to the rights-based approach, which is exactly kind of where we are now, which is, that we're looking much more at that it is the right of the individual to have the supports, to have their difference acknowledged and celebrated, and so on. So, maybe you take us through, that, like you said, the shifting lens to how we refocus to that child-based, the children's rights-based approach, how we can refocus the lens to ensure that we're coming at it from that rights-based perspective.
Yeah, and I suppose, and we've talked about this before, Mara, you and and I suppose my own work is very influenced by, well, Yuri Bronfenbrenner for sure, but also Loris Malaguzzi and the Reggio Emilia approach and the principles of the Reggio Emilia approach. And I remember actually going there with yourselves in Early Childhood Ireland, I'd say it was 2012, and being so excited about it, about everything about it just resonated with me. And I think we're all a bit like that, those of us who are immersed in early childhood. We all find our home, and we all find the theorist that resonates most with us. And for different reasons, I'm going to mention Reggio Emilia today. Yeah, the special
rights bit,
exactly.
I think really resonates with a lot of us, that, everyone has rights, but some people have special rights. And isn't special a kind of a more inclusive, warm term than additional, or that implies that it's, you need to go that step beyond because of the social model or the medical model, whereas special is special.
Yeah, and Maura, I couldn't agree more. And I think the importance of that word special, and I've thought about it a lot actually, is that sometimes we think that the rights are for some children and not for all children. And I think we can be forgiven for that actually, because the child's right to have a voice is limited by age and maturity according to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, as you know. And actually, Dr. Lisa O'Sullivan, who I work with here in Mary Immaculate College, and myself have repeatedly tried to dispel that myth. And we have worked very hard to find ways to ensure that all children have the right to have a voice in their education, have a voice in how they're experiencing inclusion, for example. And, I think the responsibility lies with us actually, because of course, where there's rights, there's responsibilities. So it's our responsibility as academics, as early childhood teachers, to find ways to understand what children are trying to communicate with us, because we know from the very beginning children want to communicate with us from the minute they're born. Indeed, I would argue before they're born, children are communicating with us, but we have to learn their language as well, and we have to be able to respond in that regard. So what I think special does is it says to us, actually, all children have rights. So, direct attention to that and kind of do something about it. And, we've a lot I'm very proud, really, I suppose, of my journey over 100 years in terms of the Irish context. Look, I mean, there's lots of things we didn't do right, and there's lots of things we still are not doing right, but we always have this deep commitment, I think, to rights, stemming, if you like, from the Constitution in 1937. And what's maybe lesser well known is that at the foundation of the state and during the just kind of in the aftermath of the Civil War, while there was a lot of, I suppose a lot of disturbance, a lot of unrest, we still had a constitution that was in 1922 telling us that we were committing to this right to education. However, of course, early childhood education still needs to be enshrined in the constitution. But just to go back for a minute to Article 3 of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which was actually 2006 and not ratified by Ireland until 2018. But it's interesting to look at that, because what it does is it identifies the core principles of a human rights-based approach as inherent dignity, individual autonomy, non-discrimination, participation, inclusion, respect for difference, acceptance of human diversity, equality of opportunity, accessibility, and respect for children's evolving capacities and their right to preserve their identities. Now, I think all of those words are very much part of our DNA, really, as early childhood educators, as early childhood advocates. So what I would see is that really the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child are very much in harmony with each other. But as I said just previously there, I am not very happy about this limited by age and maturity, because I'm going to read for you here another piece from this evaluation. And what we did was we said, okay, how can we find out how very young children are experiencing their early childhood setting? How does it feel for them? So as researchers, as you know, Maura, and you're in and out of early childhood settings all of the time, when we're a stranger coming in, it's more difficult. And so what we did was we developed what we call this thing, exploring and thinking. So this methodology really was that we had got these cameras, we explored, getting the cameras, putting a camera on the child, of course, with the child's assent and so on, and all very ethically done, and spent the day in the setting with the child. So the child had a lot of footage. Now, there was a lot of footage that was showing us the sky and a lot of footage that was showing us people's shoes. But nonetheless, we got quite a lot of really valuable video footage. And what we did then was, with the child afterwards, we had a conversation about what was going on. And I just love this. It's a day in the setting for Zane. My name is Zane. I'm 4 years old. Today, I'm doing some colouring for Father's Day. When I am finished, I put the box of crayons away on the shelf, which I can easily reach. Next, I get my lunchbox out of my bag to have a snack. I find my bag and a hook, which has my name and photograph displayed above it. When I am finished my snack, I wash out my yogurt pots and sing to myself. Now I start playing toy cars with my friends. Later, when the researcher asks me questions about my day, I say that cars are my favourite thing to play with in the preschool. I also tell the researcher that I like playing with dinosaurs and animals, and that I can find these toys easily on the shelf because they are low down. I tell the researcher that I like playing with my friends every day. Now, there's more there, but I suppose it's an interesting insight into Zane's day in the school. And of course, Zane, we wrote this up based on our conversation with Zane and based on the video data. But you can see here what the child is communicating to us. The child is communicating to us that he belongs, that he has his friends. And I mean, in the end of the day, Maura, it is about belonging. We all need to have that sense of belonging. Is it somewhere I want to be? Is it somewhere that I feel that I can be myself? And you, again, of course, the role of play. And I know you had one of you celebrated International Day of Play recently, and we celebrated it here at Mary Immaculate College as well. And in fact, that day I attended a webinar in the Pedal Centre in Cambridge, and what it was said was play is the great equalizer. And of course it is. And you can hear Zane here, that idea of play. So I think we have to, isn't it lovely? It is really lovely,
and
Maura.
it reminds me, do you remember with the Universal Design Guidelines, when we were doing the case studies, we gave the cameras to the children, and they took photos, and some of those photos were in the final guidelines as well. And, you know, and even when you were saying about the ceiling and the shoes and so on, you know, we forget that a lot of the, you know, if a child is lying on the floor, that's their view. If they're stretched out, you know, in a prone position, they're looking at shoes. We don't see that because we tend to be kind of standing upright more of the time, but children aren't. They have those different perspectives, and it's great to be reminded, isn't it, of what those perspectives are.
Yeah, and you know, as like Maura, I suppose this is, I hope this is helpful to your listeners, because it always does concern me that we are saying that a child's you know, ability or competence to participate is limited by age and maturity. Because, you know, I think there are so many, and I think, look, technology offers us so many possibilities at this stage in terms of how we can use and how we can creatively think about it. And, you know, Maria Montessori, she's one of my other great influencers. And Maria Montessori said, a teacher who is unable to observe is unable to teach. And, you know, that is really important in terms of inclusion, because here, as we used that methodology, and every single day without this methodologist, every single day inside in an early childhood setting, we are observing. And, you know, I've been in many early childhood settings, and I suppose the commitment and the absolute attunement really of early childhood teachers to everything that's going on in the setting is very powerful. And it's truly humbling actually to be part of it, because, you know, it's that connectivity, isn't it, Maura? And that just concern really for each child, and that each child gets the very best chance that that child can get in that setting.
And that bit about attunement and connection and relationships, it's reminding me of the report that Early Childhood Ireland and Stranmillis did for the NCCA for updating Ashler, where it was the educators who know the children really well, rather than researchers going in, observing, you know, children they don't know, whose context they're not aware of. So it was the educators who were supported around gathering the opinions and the views of children on Ashler and what they felt was work. And the second report has just been published. And that bit about harnessing, exactly like you say, the knowledge that the educators have of the children. Because when you go in as a researcher, support worker, mentor, whatever, you know, it's a snapshot you're seeing. Even when we did the case studies for the Universal Design Guidelines, it's a snapshot on the day. You're getting to know the setting, whereas the educators who are there every day know it intimately and know the children intimately and can give much better insights, really, can't they?
Oh yeah, Maura, you
you
know,
know,
and
on
you're
what
after
children
reminding
are
me of
thinking
something
and
now.
feeling.
Oh yeah, and you just reminded me of actually, you just reminded me of other work that we've been involved in. You know, the access and the evaluation of AIM, for example, and we've also Dr. Lisa O'Sullivan has worked with me on this, on the AIM, but also on the evaluation of the National Council for Special Education Frontline Services. And so what we did was we actually worked with teachers and with early childhood educators, so that in effect they were the researchers, because they have the lens to practice. And I think there's great power in that. And I know yourselves in Early Childhood Ireland, you know, that's kind of core really to your mission in that regard. But you were talking there actually, and you reminded me again, there's so many things that we could keep talking about, but the Universal Design Guidelines. So again, that is one of the projects that I am so proud of. And I know, Maura, we worked together on that. And again, going back to Reggio Emilia, which was a huge influence on that whole project, really, and that idea of space and that concept of space. And I think the concept of space is something, as early childhood educators, we really need to think about very carefully. And so, and when I talk about space, I'm talking about the physical space and the relational space. So, you know, and we know, and please do, your listeners, have a look at those Universal Design Guidelines, because, you know, I actually never tire of looking at them. And at the moment we are working, in fact, with the Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth. I have to say that really faster, I just won't remember it. And the National Disability Authority. And I know you're helping us with that, Maura, to make sure that actually there are 2 e-learning modules that will be freely available to everybody, so that you can kind of tune in and out of those. But anyway, back to those spaces. So if we think about the physical space, it's so important, you know, and we can make these spaces really places of encounters. And isn't that another lovely principle from Reggio Emilia? Places of encounters that can support each child's learning and development. And in consultation with the child, we can craft a responsive physical space, because children will tell us about the physical spaces they're in, as you know. They'll tell us what makes them feel safe, what makes them feel happy, what makes them feel, that other word, that they belong. And that physical space is one thing. And I think that idea of the relational space is so important. And another one of my great heroes is Edmund Hush, who also, his just 3 words. And I used to say this to the students: if nothing else, if you forget everything else I've said to you, if you say interactions drive development, you know, interactions drive development. So how are we actually in our environment? What kind of interactions do we have with children? What kind of interactions do we have with everyone else in the setting? Are we creating an environment, both in the physical space and in the interaction and environment, where all children are enabled, and that they feel that their voice is heard, and that they feel that they are really, you know, it's simple, that they belong?
Yeah, that bit about space, I mean, it's a key part of the laundry model as well, that giving children space. And I mean, the daily routine impacts that. Like you say, it's not just the physical space, it's giving children time to form their thoughts and express those thoughts, isn't it? In, you know, in whatever medium, be it verbal, be it drawing, be it music, you know, whatever one of the 100 languages the children want to use.
And, you know, here we're going again on Reggio Emilia and that 100 languages. I think the power of the 100 languages, that poem, I was working with 30, actually not early childhood students here, but with some BEd students, so primary teachers. And I actually printed off the 100 languages of children for them, because we really have to remind ourselves that, again, it goes back to the start of the webinar, actually, about difference and how each of us can express our learning. And there are so many ways we can do that now. So it's, you know, I think traditionally, you know, going back, and I've spoken to a lot of people, and in fact, for the 100 Years Project and their experience of school. And, you know, we had that focus really on everything, you know, being written, the written word and so on. Whereas we know that we can display our learning in so many other ways other than the written word. And really, this is a message for our whole education system, Maura, in terms of how, you know, how are we capturing children's learning, and are we enabling them to express themselves, and are we enabling those 100 languages? Because, you know, I was last week, I was involved here, in the Department of Reflective Pedagogy and Early Childhood Studies, we had some Lego serious play. And again, the power of Lego, you know, we worked with it ourselves for the day, because we felt we're always preaching about play, so let's practice what we preach. And, you know, we've had, yeah, it was a great day. But, you know, I've been reflecting on it ever since, Maura, in terms of, for myself, you know, kind of communicating rather than verbally, or rather than through the written word, communicating through Lego models. Now, let me tell you, I'm no genius with the Lego models. They were so basic, but it wasn't that. It was, I suppose, it's all of the senses that we learn through, you know, that kinesthetic, that sensory, and then doing these creations and being able to do that in that way. So, you know, these are messages that are really important for inclusion, actually, that we know that everyone, you know, communicates differently, and let's be responsive, and let's understand, and let's take our responsibility very seriously, and let's remember what Maria Montessori said.
And another Italian that has influenced me was Aldo Fortunati from San Miniato, who spoke in Ireland. And he talked about, you know, when you mentioned about the 3 words, his 3 words were trust, opportunity, and time. And I think that kind of ties in with, you know, the relational spaces as well, that kind of shared understanding bit about seeing every child as having competencies and the ability to be confident, and not limiting our view of the child by maybe, you know, a disability, or, you know, that we trust children to be as competent as they can be, and give them the opportunities and the time to demonstrate that
Yeah,
is
Maura,
very
and
important.
I do, and I think, I suppose the other caveat I'd say here as well, that as early childhood educators and as those of us who are so committed to early childhood and inclusion, we it's not our responsibility, of course, because we know that effective inclusion is complex at a broader level, and it's associated firstly with a strong government commitment and adequate resourcing and intergovernmental collaboration, which I think we're getting better at in Ireland. We need professional learning opportunities. We need a responsive professional learning continuum for all early childhood educators, for all teachers in the system. We need to continually consult with all of the stakeholders. The parents are critically important here, the children themselves, and we need to understand the complexity really of inclusion. It's by no means simple, and we need to have to continue really to review and to interrogate and to question our own understanding, Maura. Again, we wrote an article, it's in LINC, and it's called Creating Spaces Where Diversity is the Norm. And through teacher education and professional learning, they're very powerful. And we know that from the LINC programme. We know that from our early childhood degree here in the college, our Bachelor of Arts in Early Childhood Care and Education. And we know it actually from the LINC CPD programme. We have thousands of early childhood teachers participating in that in their own time, the LINC CPD Plus program. But, and if, again, I'm not going to read any more because I know our webinar must be coming to an end now, but I just advise your listeners, if you have a chance, just to flick on the LINC website, find that LINC evaluation and just see what early childhood teachers are telling us about the impact of high quality professional learning. Because, as teachers, we can't do this all on our own. I always remember, Maura, this is another memory I have when we did the evaluation here in the college. A load of us did an evaluation of provision for autistic children. And I was in a school way out west, a rural school, and the teacher there was doing her best, but it was quite challenging in terms of, again, the teacher education, etc., etc. And she said, I'm only a teacher, Emer. I'm not a speech and language therapist. I'm not an occupational therapist. And I think that's a message we need to hold on to as well, that this is something we need help with. We're willing to roll the sleeves up and do it, because I think as early childhood teachers, as primary teachers, as post-primary teachers, we all want to do the best for the child, and we will just roll the sleeves up and get in there, but we do need help. And I think that's what we have to acknowledge that. And, to be fair, really, there has been a lot of investment in the professional learning continuum, and hopefully that will continue into the future.
Yeah. And I think the danger with not having that multidisciplinary approach is actually more harm than done. More harm than good can be done through lack of knowledge, not lack of willingness to support or whatever. It's just none of us, I mentioned this, I think, even in the last episode, none of us know what we don't know. And that, it can be, we need that multidisciplinary approach and have everybody kind of coming together. So
we do. And I think parents are huge here in terms of, as parents know their children. And I think we can glean so much understanding as educators from working with parents in a meaningful way. And again, that can only enrich our experience as educators and enrich the child's experience and ultimately the family's experience, because of course, it's families need a lot of support, and that, as we know, look, from watching, we see it flashing across our screens all of the time. Indeed, during my 100 Years project, I spoke with 27 different stakeholders during that project, and 4 of those were parents, and of course their experience was quite challenging at times, to put it mildly. So I think
be very
difficult.
Very difficult.
And as early childhood educators, I suppose we're in a particular position because we're the first educators who will meet the parents. So again, that's and part of the LINC program, we focus very much on that. And in fact, students on the LINC program and INCOs now, graduates of the LINC program, always tell us that they value that piece, that module, hugely in terms of supporting them. Yes,
well,
absolutely.
We touched on that, the changing perspectives bit, and I think that's probably, I remember a friend of mine who's a retired primary principal saying that kind of, when she was in Mary I, it was kind of like, children need to start school at 4 so that their education can begin, because, sure, they've had their parents and they might have had a bit of play school, but really it's only when they come to us that their education begins. And I mean, my goodness, thankfully things have changed in that 45 or whatever years, that we now, value early years education so much, and we value the knowledge that parents have of their children, rather than sometimes, in the past, dismissing it maybe, and seeing educators as the people who know best. It's only good for the children if everybody works together and sees the fears that maybe parents have, that sometimes, they're afraid to acknowledge that maybe their child has special rights, or they're not even sure themselves because it's a new experience for them. And I think it's valuing their expertise and helping to allay their fears is only good for children.
I think so, Maura. And like that was a while ago, as you spoke about there, but we did that evaluation of concepts of school readiness among parents and educators in Ireland. And that was back in 2016, I think. And even at that point, there was a lot of misunderstanding around, school readiness really, and what it entailed. And I always remember a little child actually drew, we again were, we wanted to make sure that we had children's voices in this, and a child, again, I always seem to be sent out to the peripheries of the country to do my research. But anyway, this little child saying to me, she drew this beautiful picture of this huge big school, and she said, I'll be going to that big school now, but there'll be no more play. I'll be sitting down all day and it'll be all homework, and while, this was a like 3.5-year-old, 4-year-old child. And I thought the wisdom of that child, because it actually encapsulated all of the academic writing around school readiness at that time. Are we thinking about children? Are we thinking at the developmental stage they're at? Are we providing them with opportunities appropriate to their stage of development, rather than, the schoolification epidemic? So, again, the power of the child's voice. But I think the power of the early childhood educator is really key to this. And this is my final hero, Barack Obama, he said this, and it's one I hold on to a lot. He said, real change doesn't come from the top down, but from the bottom up, from ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And actually, Maura, that is what I firmly believe is happening in early learning and care, to use the nomenclature from First 5, every day here in Ireland. And, I just want to say that because it's my fundamental belief, really, and I have seen it firsthand. But we can't do it alone, and we have to keep advocating, and we have to ensure that we have all of the competence that we need to do the best we can for our children.
For every child.
For every child, exactly.
Emer, that's a lovely point to end on. Thank you so much for sharing your passion, the research you've done, and your practical knowledge. It's been really good to talk to you, and thanks for taking the time to come on the podcast.
Likewise, Maura. I could stay here for the night talking, but I'll stop now.
So could I.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for listening to this episode of Early Childhood Ireland's podcast, which is proudly supported by Aricus Insurance. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and spread the word to your friends and colleagues, and stay tuned for our next episode.